Hey everyone, welcome yet again to Piano Tech Radio Hour. Looking forward to another fun day today. Hope you guys are all having a good Saturday. Um, Excited to hear, been hearing from a lot of community members that, business has been picking up. I know we're still dealing with you know, COVID issues and people are in and out of the house and under various degrees of restrictions, but it seems like people are getting out there, getting out and about, getting back to business, getting some work done. So very excited to hear about that. And yet still here to support folks who are looking to get things rolling again in greater detail. I'll give a quick shout out to people watching on social so they know what they're checking out. And then we'll get rolling for the day today. Today, I just want to give a little bit of a wrap up on some things, but like I said, I'll give an intro to the session and then we'll get rolling. So, welcome to those of you that are viewing here to Piano Tech Radio Hour. And this is a session where we bring you, some of the best in the piano industry, whether that be technicians or, brand ambassadors or store owners, or even sometimes players and things like this. And we learn from them and everybody here, if you're here often, if you're watching, if you're participating, and even our instructors, right? It's pretty clear that the folks that are involved are at the top of their game or looking to be at the top of the game in the piano tech world. And so really appreciate everyone that's here and appreciate the fact that we can all bond all throughout the world to this end. This event is brought to us by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, which is an associated project that's been around since 2017. We bring cutting edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. People can find more out about that at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. And as I've been saying recently, Piano Technicians Masterclasses, we have some subscription models and we've been adapting those throughout the pandemic and updating how exactly those subscriptions get executed. Previously, what people would do when we started out with the master classes was they would subscribe for a year and then they'd be eligible for, we would usually do about 6 or 7 master classes throughout the year. And throughout the pandemic, we've discovered the power of conventions. We can sort of do one event that brings everyone together in a more meaningful way. And so, at this moment in time, you can, in addition to attending a convention and sort of signing up for access to recordings as part of that, which is generally our kind of high tier package, you could also be a subscriber to Piano Technicians Masterclasses on a monthly basis. And those same lectures, you'll have access to them, but they'll be in sort of a graded schedule of releases. And so this month, we're releasing to that library of lectures a lecture from David Stanwood from December 2020, which was all about kind of piano, touch, and tone. Really interesting lecture where, probably the most interesting thing that I took out of it was a really strong focus on wool and its role in the sound of the piano, how the properties of wool are so unique and special for the creation of piano hammers and the tone that we want to get out of them. And and in addition, kind of, how do we voice, how do we think about the hammer in terms of the components of the hammer and like the different areas of the hammer, the strike point, the shoulders, the different layers of felt and how they affect the type of sound we want to get out of the hammer. So a very intriguing lecture. And that if you're a subscriber, that should be in your library, should have just appeared yesterday on the 1st of October. So excited to hear your feedback on that. If you go watch that lecture or rewatch that lecture, hope you enjoy it. Um, another thing that's really interesting about David Stanwood, if you're not aware, he knows a lot about sheep and wool because he actually has some sheep on his property. During the lecture, I would take a quick peek out his window into his yard, and he has a handful of sheep that hang out there. And in addition to that, his wife is actually a felt specialist. She makes art with felt, and she does a lot of really cool stuff with felt. So he's exactly the person you want to hear about felt and wool from. Also from that convention, we had another interesting lecture that addressed the importance of wool in pianos, but that one was from Alex Kirsten out of Steingraber Pianos in Germany, and he also discussed at great length how they think about creating hammers and the importance of the wool that they use and how they process the wool and special instructions that they give to hammer makers. They actually at Steingraber make special requests of the hammer makers so that they get exactly the type of that the wool gets treated exactly how they'd like it to be treated in order to create the sound that they appreciate the most. So that's really, really cool stuff. And this is a little bit of kind of piano industry news. Alex Kirsten, who did host that lecture, he was working for Steingraber Pianos at the time, and he actually has changed positions. I believe he is at Bosendorfer now. Don't quote me on that, but he has moved to a different organization. Um, as far as I know, with the good the taking the goodwill of the Steingraber group along with him, just kind of moving on to different things that he's doing there. So that's exciting, and hopefully we'll get him back involved with that brand as well. So I want to give a little bit of a recap on the convention today. I want to answer questions for people about the future. Also would like to take a minute to kind of reflect on the entire history of piano technicians master classes from its origins all the way to what it is today, because I think, you know, various of you have entered the journey at various points in time, and I think it's interesting to really get a picture of everything that's been going on and how it's evolved. So, and if you have any questions that come up along the way, feel free to put them in the chat. If anybody's got anything they feel would be interesting to share, you can go ahead. I see we got a handful of people watching online on Facebook and YouTube. You're welcome to write things in the chat as well. I see Rennie. I wish I could pronounce this, Nguyen. I see you out there watching us on Facebook. Welcome. And we will post a link in the Facebook chat. If you want to join us in the Zoom today, we'll post a link so that you can do that. And typically, if you haven't joined us before, you can register each week and join us for free, or you can sign up for Piano Tech Radio Hour subscription, in which case you'll automatically be able to attend all of these sessions without going through any particular extra steps each week. And on top of that, you'll have recordings in the member area, so that's pretty cool. As far as the convention goes, I'm going to get to that in a minute, give a little bit of a recap. And I'm just going to pull up some notes here first. But yeah, I just want to bring you all back, and I'm curious as I talk through the story how much you all know about this story. So this is a story of piano technicians masterclasses, how we got started and how we got to where we are today. And if you have any questions or comments along the way, I very much appreciate your participation. So back in, I think it was 2017, the year 2017, this was when I was actually doing some pretty hardcore research in the piano industry. I have been a piano technician since around the year 2000, when I learned how to tune pianos while I was at the university at Rutgers studying jazz piano performance. And ever since then, I had been tuning pianos as a way to earn some income and do something musical that could be professional as well. I also started a apprenticeship program in New York City to teach other people how to become piano technicians. That tended to be, local people to Brooklyn, where I was living, typically younger people in their 20s who, were musical and, thought it would be a great way to make some extra money and do something they could be passionate about. And we bring people on who are, just curious about pianos and tuning. And you can look that business up if you want. It's floatingpianofactory.com. And enjoyed working on that business over the years. That business is actually written up in the Wall Street Journal at a point in time. We had a reporter from the Journal actually use our services and report on what we were doing. One of the cool features of what we do at Floating Piano Factory is we bring on people who are younger or new to the business, and we offer their services at a discounted rate to our clients in exchange for the client having a little bit of tolerance that they're in their learning phases, right? So they're going to get a pretty good tuning done, but they're actually in the learning process. It might take a little bit longer. They might run into an issue that they don't know how to handle, and someone else from our team can come back and pick up the reins at that point. And of course, I started that because I was always frustrated as someone trying to learn about pianos and being a piano technician. If I was alone and I was independent and I ran into a problem, what did I do? There are a lot of other technicians out there, but did they have time for my phone call? Were they willing to kind of pick up the reins if I had an issue with the piano? And so Floating Piano Factory sort of built in like a built-in safety net so people can explore and learn rapidly and do a good job and feel comfortable and confident when they're going out there and tuning pianos, even when they're new to the business. And that's still running today. So anyways, it was a number of years after starting Floating Piano Factory that I was researching in the piano industry at potential other opportunities to serve the industry. And so actually what I did was I spent a good amount of time making phone calls. So, we have directories of piano technicians, and I would call up piano technicians and we'd bond a little bit. We'd have some conversations, but really I'd ask them like, what do you need? Like, what kind of problems are you having? And do you think there's any way that they could be solved, right? And of course, I can tell you a few of the problems that came up in those conversations. And I had over 100 conversations with piano technicians all over the world during that process. Of course, we have services like Gazelle, right, that help you keep track of your clients and help you do booking. That was certainly an issue that came up in those conversations. Another issue that came up in those conversations is just obtaining clients. Like, how do I market? How do people find out about me? How do I have a website? How do I get reviews about my business online and grow my business? That was another issue. But the issue that really had some traction was a number of you out there said, hey, like, listen, I know what I'm doing, but at the same time, there's a lot of stuff that I don't know. And I feel uncomfortable when I'm going out there and doing work because I want to do the best possible job, but I sometimes wonder, how do I get the information? And I talk to people who are, out in the middle of nowhere ostensibly in terms of networking with other piano technicians, going to guild meetings and apprenticing with someone, right? So I talk to people who might have to travel 4 hours to go to a piano technicians guild meeting, and of course, and when they got there, they felt like they were the person who everybody else looked to for information, right? And say, oh well, if I'm that guy for this or gal for that region, where do I look to for coaching and training? And at the same time of hearing about that problem, we heard specifically, I had a very pivotal conversation with Boaz Kirchenbaum. He was one of the people I interviewed, and unfortunately, it was like kind of one of the later people I interviewed. I kind of wished he and I had this conversation earlier. And he said he had two main problems. One was he did not like to see piano technicians out there doing work that was not quality, not up to high standards, right? But he didn't blame the piano technicians for doing that lower quality work because he understood they might not have access to the education and the knowledge to do a good job. You don't know what you don't know, right? Let's put it that way. And so he said that was one of his problems. But the other problem was he had training, he had knowledge, and he could deliver it to people, right, in lecture format, at like a guild meeting, or he could travel to a convention, but it's a very limited audience that he could access, right? So those are like the two main problems: seeing work out there that wasn't quite up to par, and also being able to solve that problem by training people, but really not having the bandwidth to train as many people as he'd like, right? He could only do small groups. And with those two problems in mind, we said, hey, what if we were able to do some online master classes? We talked about it have to be good enough quality to kind of really, really get a good listen to things, a good view of things, a close-up view, some like personalized potential attention and engagement. And so that's when we started setting up these one-off master classes, and Boas Kirschenbaum was the very first. And it was just a test, right? I said, hey, Boaz, I'm going to ask some people if they want to attend it. We'll put a price point on it. And if we don't get enough people on board, we're not going to do it. It's probably a bad idea. So I think I had a threshold of about 30 people. And sure enough, we handily got 30 people to sign up for that first master class. It was a great success. We got great feedback. And then that was the sort of responsibility on my part. Hey, like, I got to expand this. I got to extend this. And that put me out there on the scene, trying to see who else could get involved. And, even though I had been in the piano industry for a while, I wasn't as connected as I am today with sort of the best folks in the industry. So I was kind of cold calling folks like Del Fondrick, right? Or David Anderson, right? Or Rick Baldeson or something like that, and saying, hey, like, I got this kind of fun idea. It seems like it might work. Are you interested in being involved? And quite frankly, that was not easy. There were some people who were like, yeah, I don't know. I've never done this before. Good luck, or I'm too busy, stuff like that. But luckily, we had some really, really great supporters early on. Del Fondrick was one of them, for example. David Anderson, of course, as you all know, was one of them really early on. And we got a handful of folks that were really excited about it, and we started to do the master classes. And then what I try to do in order to support that project is create a sort of subscription service where annually you could sign up at the beginning of the year and say, hey, trusting that there are going to be about 6 or 7 lectures this year, sign me up, and then I'll be able to attend all for one special price. So we got people signed on for that. And of course, keep in mind, as I was doing this early on, there was support, but there was a lot of people who were like, didn't get it. Why would you even do this? It just doesn't make sense. Why don't people just learn in person? And that was sort of my challenge to communicate to people, what are the advantages here? Because there's certainly disadvantages, right? I can't sit next to my mentor, they can't hold my hand and, show me exactly the pressure that I put on the tuning hammer. There's a lot of disadvantages in terms of like being in the room with someone, having them watch you watching them. Those are all granted. But I think what people didn't realize are the advantages. Okay, so one, you don't have to wait for that very special moment where you two can be in the same place, right? You could train with someone completely on the other side of the globe, like literally completely on the other side of the globe that you would never have access to. One really counterintuitive thing was sometimes when you're doing remote learning, you can actually get a closer look at something that you couldn't see up close if you were in person, right? Because when we're in person and we're studying things, we can only really use our eyes to see. We don't use like microscopes or special cameras to like look into the action to see how it's doing. But when I have a camera up close, I can get a close-up view of something from a distance, right? And you can really see what that looks like up close, what's going on in detail. And not only that, but everybody who's viewing can see that at the same time, right? So if you look at a convention format, everybody's sitting in chairs, they're all 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 feet away. Only 1 or 2 people, if that, are really going to get an up close and personal view of what's going on. And when we started doing things remotely, everybody could be happy. Everybody could have a front row seat. Everybody could get that that specialized and up close and personal look at what's going on. So that all those benefits started to be clear. Much appreciation. Some of you are here today from those folks that were like very early on supporters. Larry Lobel, I see you there. I believe you were one of our earliest supporters. Calvin, I see you there. You think you were one of our earliest supporters. Like people were like, yeah, like this really makes sense to me. And so we continued that. And then of course the pandemic hit. And this was a really good opportunity to really show what kind of value that we could provide. And at the same time, it was a very difficult time. So that's when David Anderson and we had been close, and he had been quite a vocal supporter of what I was doing. But we started to become closer and collaborate a little bit more. And he was one of those people very early on when I said, hey, like we got to help even though it's a tough time, even though we can sort of complain, even though we can look out for ourselves, only during this difficult time during the pandemic, hey, what if we did something to support the community? And that's when we started to go out there and do piano technicians master classes. And it was just an idea. It was just kind of fun. David and Anderson and I, kind of powwowed on what it would be like. And it turned out to be this really awesome combination of his kind of like both sort of young sensibility and his year of experience sensibility, and sort of my intermediate sort of even-tempered sensibility. These two things came together, and we created something that had an appeal to a wider audience. Seemed to be very supportive of folks that were out there, sometimes with not a lot to do. And sort of we continued on with this. But the problem there was we could do this remote Piano Tech radio hour, but the way we were doing master classes at the time, I would actually go out, plan a trip to visit the teacher that was going to teach. We'd get a camera crew together, we'd get AV support together, we'd get a live streaming crew together, and we'd have to go on location to set things up and stream those lectures. And of course, that started to be unfeasible, during quarantine. You can't travel. You don't want to go spreading diseases around the globe as you're traveling to set these things up. You get people in a close space. So that's when we started to experiment with the convention format, and that's been really cool. And so for the time being, these conventions are probably going to be central to what we're doing. We'll probably do a handful of them each year, and bear with us as we continue to experiment, because this domain is continuously changing, and we want to bring you sort of the best formats that we can in order to give you quality content. So at the moment, what we're doing is we'll have these conventions. You could sort of get a seat at one of the conventions at various levels. Usually there's like attend one day, maybe you can attend all days, but only the live format, or you can attend everything and access the recordings. And then in addition to that, if you're a subscriber, you can have access to the recordings. Like I said, on a monthly basis, they can just be released month after month, and you can enjoy those like in a more digestible format as they come. And our plan right now is to notify people, like give you a little bit more detail and notice about, hey, what lecture is coming up this month, whether you're a subscriber or not a subscriber, so that you can prepare for it. Oh, hey, like I got to make time to watch this lecture with David Stanwood this month. I really want to check it out. It's new. It's coming out. Check that out, and then the next month you can have a new lecture to focus on. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with everything, and we'll be developing the system more as we find out how to serve you guys best. But that's kind of the history of what's going on. So beyond that, I don't know if anybody had any questions. I thought that was really good information to share, because I'm realizing more and more not everybody knows kind of the full evolution of what's going on with piano technicians master classes. So now that I went over that, again, if nobody has any questions or comments, no problem. I want to do like a review of our convention content. from this previous convention. Let you guys know if you haven't, sort of been there for the convention, like how you can access the various lectures and so on and so forth, or get the convention content, and also just kind of tell you how things went and what was in each lecture, all that stuff for your for the benefit of you having more information. So if you give me 1 second, I'll share my screen, make sure it's set up for sharing. There's that window. Okay, beautiful. All right. So I'll just take you back to the web page where we put the information for the convention, and I'll go through the content, sort of like explain, what we went through and what kind of information we discovered in each of these lectures. And by the way, maybe I'll have some time to go into this a little bit before we wrap up, but I want to go into the fact that we're actually going to keep extending this convention. We've discovered that, and this is what I'm talking about, having new means of providing support to everyone. We're discovering, a convention doesn't have to be 3 days in a row, right? A convention doesn't have to, it doesn't have to stop. Like once it's ended, just because people don't have to go home and leave their hotel rooms and do other things, we can add content, we can add days, we can do other things. We can add bonus content for people who are already a part of it as we continue. So that's something I'll go to a little bit later, but we plan to, if you have already signed up for this convention, we will be adding things for you as time goes on, just for having subscribed for it. Yep. So let me go through what we have here. So initially we planned days on the 2nd, the 10th, and the 18th of September. We're now in October. We actually had ended up doing a day on the 25th. This is a good moment. I can recognize the sponsors that we had involved. So Randy Potter School, very proud to have them be a sponsor of the project. Very well-known name in the piano industry, and Randy had never actually been involved in our lectures, so it was a privilege to have Randy participate for the first time. Benside Arts, that's Ken Eschites. He's been developing, he has not only his own restoration and rebuilding shop that he brands as Benside Arts, but he also has education around that. So he's been experimenting himself with online learning, just like we have. And he's teaching people how to do belly work and all sorts of wonderful things in an online format. So that's pretty awesome. And I'll put a link in the chat actually to the convention overview, because maybe you might find that useful to look at your own pace. And then Rayburn Piano Works. Rayburn, I think we're all familiar with the Rayburn name. They're pretty big in the piano industry, at least on the technical side. Those folks who go out and tune pianos have heard of them. They have Rayburn Cybertuner, which is a sponsor, but also they sponsor through Rayburn Piano Works, which I think is a relatively new project of theirs. I believe they bought the business from another piano technician in the industry, and they do, custom retrofit keyboards, and are really upping their game in that particular domain and providing some excellent keyboard work for folks. Life in Tune is also a sponsor of the convention, which we'll be hearing about a little bit more as time goes on. And this is Freddie Ravel, who is a very successful musician who's worked with everyone from Madonna to Al Jarreau to Earth, Wind, and Fire. He's played keyboards all over the world and piano all over the world with folks. And right now he does kind of he does keynote speaking. He does presentations, and basically he takes music and brings it to people as a form of inspiration and helping them tune up their lives, right, through music. So he's a really cool guy. He's a friend. He sponsored the convention. I want to thank him for that. And we'll having some content from him on some of these future days that are coming up. Grandwork Tools, that's Chris Brown. He facilitates people doing regulation by creating these really awesome custom kits for setting up your action so you can do regulations at home to very high specifications. Very smart guy, very smart engineer and manufacturer of tools. So we appreciate him supporting us. Siegel Music Museum, also a sponsor, have this really cool music museum out in, I believe, South Carolina. And, they have pianos there, they have historical pianos there, but they also have other really cool historical instruments, from saxophones to, I believe, like, I don't know, flutes, guitars, you name it. They have this really cool music museum where they're preserving musical history through the instruments that they have acquired. And then finally, Ravenscroft Pianos is also a really exciting new sponsor that we have. Ravenscroft, of course, is run by Michael Spreeman, who David Anderson, I know, would talk about very often as one of his inspirations in terms of doing quality action work and regulation and understanding how the piano works. David often said he learned probably the most from Michael Spreeman about how to work on pianos and piano actions. And Ravenscroft is its own brand of custom pianos. So those are our sponsors. Let's talk a little bit about some of the classes. First class, Rebuilding and Restoring the Upright Piano. This was a class with Bill Monroe. A little bit of an overview on that. I gave a little bit of a sample as well, a video sample of the lecture a few weeks ago. But just to kind of describe and explain what was part of that, Bill is kind of this guy who's just out there in the Midwest, with his little shop. It's little, but it's also big. He created a custom building, which he also gave us a tour of, I think, on a radio hour previously, just for him to perform his restoration work. He's got a very organized mind. He plans, down to the T things in advance, and he has a really, really specialized approach to restoring pianos. And on top of that, he also gave a lecture at a previous convention, I believe it was the December 2020 convention, where he just talked about kind of how does he sort of quote unquote sell jobs to his clients, right? And of course, like, selling is a word that sometimes we can feel awkward with as piano technicians, but his approach is really interesting. He doesn't really quote unquote sell anything very hard. He just makes a note with every client to give them an idea of what they could do to their piano if they wanted to, right? And it's always up to them to make that decision. He creates a bid for them and says, here it is, and he leaves it at that. They can contact him if they're interested, and they can just have it for information purposes if not. And what was interesting for him, he shared that during the pandemic, he actually had quite a bit of restoration work coming in. And that's because he had these bids that he maybe put out sometimes, 2, 3, 4 years ago. And somebody came back around and said, hey, like, I think it's time. I think I want to go ahead and do this. So anyway, he does this kind of work out of his home workshop that he custom built, and he custom restores pianos. And so he took us through I think he said it was like a $25,000 to $30,000 job on an antique A.B. Chase upright piano from 1914. And, he said it was a really good example of something that someone restored just out of full awareness, just as a family instrument. They didn't expect, that this was somehow supposed to have some sort of resale value. They just wanted this piano to be in great condition. They wanted to enjoy it, and that expense was worth it for them, just to have the instrument for themselves to enjoy it in their home and have it restored. And in this case, I don't think there could have been a better person to perform this restoration than Bill. He gave us a very in-depth presentation packed with information about nearly every step in the process, from replacing the casters to refinishing the exterior, to, polishing the screws and finishes, and, even going so far as to, remove all the parts of the pedal assembly, and, you know, work on the interior, restore the interior of the piano, something that the client might not even really see that much, but make that look new and fresh and aesthetically pleasing. So basically, he took this piano that if you saw it, you'd say, hey, it kind of looks like an old bar piano that, who knows whether it's worth much, and really turned it into a work of art, in my opinion. Clearly, Bill takes a lot of pride in his work. And on top of that, he took pride in his presentation. So he, took it very seriously, gave a wonderful presentation, lots of photos. And I think, as I said before, information packed, right? It was just, going and going and going, because he had 1 hour, and he covered pretty much the whole process in fine detail. But on that note, he didn't cover his hammer hanging process. So after that, Chris Brown came in and picked that up. That was one thing. It's kind of funny. Bill said during the presentation, hey, well, here's the hammer hanging. Well, I won't be able to go into as much detail in that. We said, all right, that's okay. Our next lecture is with Chris Brown. And of course, Chris Brown went really deep into that process himself. And he used his tools, as mentioned earlier, to demonstrate, like, how he can really create a customized hammer hanging job that, fixes issues that you might find in a piano action. He talked about some of the alignment issues that may not be obvious to the novice who's hanging hammers, and talked about how he solved those issues and approaches that he took to hanging the hammers. And what was cool about that lecture is he brought in some custom video that he had filmed prior to the lecture, so that, again, this is one of the advantages of this type of online content. He got up close and personal with the actual piano action and hammers that he's working on, so he could really see what he was doing. And then on top of that, right, people with the recording can go back and review it, and get a deeper dive into what's going on. That's another advantage I didn't mention of these online classes to the in-person events is, we often have a recording, right, where you can go back and you can review it. And walking away from a convention with a notepad full of notes doesn't always quite cut it in terms of trying to remember what you learned and apply it. So on to the next lecture of the convention, tuning tips, tricks, and tools. This was Randy Potter. I'll say we tend to focus on some of the more advanced techniques and issues that piano technicians were going to want to deal with in our master classes. This particular class, I think, was kind of cool in that it was a little bit different than what we typically do, a little bit more geared towards general exposure to what you need to know as a piano technician, maybe some key things that you might not learn for 5 years after getting started, but are kind of simple things that you learn along the way as a piano technician. Hey, what are all the different piano tuning hammers out there, and why would I use this one over that one? Hey, how do I, efficiently use my mutes when I'm tuning? How do I make sure that I'm using a strip mute properly? And what are the different techniques and ways of doing that? And here's some, interesting tools that you might not have heard about, but you'd only hear about after being involved for several years. So I recommend that lecture for somebody who's a beginner or intermediate, and they just kind of want to pick up some interesting information. Powerful information that could really up your games, really simple, but you might not have known about. And then we had a lecture with Cybertuner. Carl Lieberman was kind of the lead instructor, but then Dean Rayburn was also instructor on that particular lecture. And they gave us information on kind of the most up-to-date things that are going on with Cybertuner. It was very interesting to hear I use Cybertuner, but it was interesting to hear some of the things that I wasn't quite aware of that they talked about. Talked about different ways that the pitch raise mode gets used, how to use that more efficiently to make your piano tuning quicker. They have this thing that they call AI mode, which I thought it stood for artificial intelligence. It may just stand for oral something or other. Um, but either way, it's kind of an interesting, nuanced version of what they've already been doing. So typically, with the way that they calculate a piano tuning, there's sort of a certain template, like a certain mathematical template that gets used to calculate that. But then when they use this AI mode, it kind of takes more into account the nuances of a piano, and they show graphically, and mathematically in that presentation how some notes, on a piano could be wildly different if you use this AI mode, which incorporates oral nuances that you might get when you do an oral tuning, and some also some mathematical techniques that are pretty cool. So they showed how just like maybe a few notes, right, near the bridge could be, wildly off from what you might mathematically predict if you used a simple method, but using the AI mode, you could, adjust for some irregularities in the piano and make the piano sound quite a bit better. And that's just a few things that they talked about in that lecture. That was really cool. Um, Sally Phillips talked about new and rebuilt piano preparation. Sally is pretty much one of the best minds in the piano industry. She's really incredible at piano restoration. She's a Steinway expert. She's been dealing with Steinway pianos for many, many years. And so, she just took us through basically like those things that if you're not paying attention, can be issues that you need to deal with new and rebuilt pianos, as they go out to the client, right? There's going to be parts that are going to settle in. How are you going to account for that? How are you going to make sure that when the piano gets delivered, the client's going to get a quality experience of that piano? Because as we all know, with pianos, just like with shoes or something, right? There's like a break-in period. There's things that you got to pay attention to, that are kind of more important in the early stages of owning that instrument. And she did a really great job, as always, of presenting things. And as always, she has a lot of unique ideas that you're not going to hear, just through word of mouth within the piano industry. Very kind of acute, specialized techniques and ideas, that may be counterintuitive or may not actually seem that important if you didn't already think about them. But if you pay attention to stuff like this, my belief is that that puts you on a lot higher level as a piano technician, and allows you to have a great reputation, charge more, get work on better types of pianos. So that was a really excellent lecture with Sally Phillips. Um, Piano appraisals for piano techs. That was an enlightening lecture with Leo Holder. Leo is a piano appraiser. He had a piano store. He basically did everything in the piano industry in the New York City area primarily over probably the course of several decades. And he kind of said to us he's basically in like a retirement stage for the last several years. And because he came from Russia, and his English wasn't that great, he never got to pursue the career of potentially a lawyer that he always aspired to. So his placeholder for that was, hey, the appraisal business actually, when you get deep into it, does require quite a complicated understanding of the law. You get into insurance issues, you get into potential legal issues with that. So he's done all the kind of examinations and training necessary to be considered an appraiser, that can give appraisals for market valuation, insurance, estate, and charitable donations, and really do that in the most appropriate way, in a legally appropriate way, things like that. So that lecture was really, really educational. I know a lot of us struggle with how we can approach appraisals or sort of estimations of the value of the piano. In general, one tip I took away is you might not want to call what you do an appraisal if you're not trained as an appraiser, and you might you definitely don't want to claim that you have some sort of credential where you can give these sort of sentiments for insurance purposes or things like that. I think the best you can do if you're not an official appraiser is just give your opinion and say that's what it is, and you can do that. And you can probably do that within a certain range of piano prices and types, that are, within the several hundred to several $1,000s range. But another takeaway from that presentation is, if you want to complete appraisals that are at a higher level for specific situations, donations, insurance, things like that, then you can partner with someone who is trained in appraisals, and you can even charge a premium on top of what they charge you for serving the client that you bring to the table, and everybody wins, right? Like you can provide a service for your clients that they appreciate. You can make a little bit of money for having the appropriate connections and pointing them to the appropriate resources, and the appraiser can do the job that they're trained to do and do it well. So that's a very interesting lecture. Next one, let's see here. See, there may be a chat. Oral intervals. Yeah, that's right, Donna. You mentioned that a couple minutes ago. Yeah, that's what AI stands for, I think, oral intervals. So that goes back to the CyberTuner lecture, and kind of like, what did that mode do? It kind of pretended that you're listening with your ear and you're checking intervals and comparing these particular notes and strings. How would that potentially be a little bit different than a generalized calculation that CyberTuner might perform? So next lecture, and boy, we had a lot of content. I'm really proud that we were able to bring all of this together so far. Like I said, we're going to bring some more things to the table too. So I'm excited to be able to deliver all that to folks. 4 important early American-made pianos, instructor Tom Strange. He is the proprietor at the Siegel Music Museum, which we mentioned earlier. And man, is he like a history buff. So he not only talked about kind of some of the specifics of the functionality of these pianos, but he also talked about their places in history. And there's actually even a piano that came across his path that's now within his museum, where there just so happened to be a family connection. It was like someone along the line of his family tree was related to the person who once owned the piano that ended up in his museum. So very cool, some interesting stories. And we'll probably get Tom to participate some more, maybe even in another session that will be included with the convention content, just talking a little bit more about just piano history in general, because I'm finding out he is just a wealth of information. He's his own encyclopedia of piano history, which there are not many of us that have that kind of knowledge. So we'd love to access him for that. So he said technology and stories between the John Barrent piano of 1775, Alpheus Babcock first iron frame piano of 1825, Robert and William Nunn's unichord piano of 1834, and the Chickering cocked hat grand piano of 1855. The ways that these pianos changed the landscape for piano making and marketing, and the technology hurdles that were overcome create a fascinating background to the modern piano today. So yeah, if you want something that's both historical, and Tom's of course an engineer, so he has some, he thinks like an engineer. He presents things in a really clear and packaged way. So that was a fun lecture there. And then Ken Eshite actually came on, and he brought on Ken Walkup as well, who is at Cornell University's Historic Keyboard Collection. Although I think Ken is sort of in the process of retiring, he's still involved in this Historic Keyboard Collection. The two Kens had collaborated on the restoration of this antique Pleyel piano, and they took us through that process, talked about some of the hurdles that they encountered. Ken had some models for illustration to kind of show us, technically what was going on with some of the problems with these pianos and how he addressed them. And that was a really thorough and interesting project. And as with say the theme of wool in the 2019 or the 2020 December convention that we had, this convention had its own little themes, right? We talked quite a bit about rebuilding. We had a lecture that went from rebuilding an upright and then transitioned to a nice lecture on hammer hanging to complement that. We also developed some themes around, historical pianos here and like appraisals and sort of the different niches within the piano industry where you can find value or have specialized knowledge. And so we found out that, even the piano appraiser, for example, has their specialties. They might not even be a specialty in historical instrument appraisals, and they might want to connect with someone who is, right? And people who know about historical instruments might not also have the skill to appraise them, right? They might want to connect with a specialized appraiser. But that was interesting, talking about piano history, the value of instruments, the value of restoring them. How do you maintain the value if you come across an old piano that you think has some value? How do you address it? Are there things you should restore and change, or are there things you should actually leave the same, even though they're not at performance level and might be appropriate not to restore them for the purposes of historical preservation? So we learned a lot about the details of how to approach those things within this convention. Alan Eder gave a lecture on the uncommon, the unusual, and the unique. Very interesting sort of smorgasbord of information, just sort of some tools, some specialized techniques that you might not have heard of. Alan works at a university in California, and so he brought in a lot of interesting things that he had encountered working on university pianos and how he dealt with some of the problems and issues that he encountered on a daily basis, working with those pianos, and also manage a team of student technicians that he trains and manages when they are working on pianos. Wayne Ferguson, actually this lecture topic changed a little bit. Wayne Ferguson talked a bit about piano preparation. He went through a process that he basically learned, I believe, through Yamaha, but modified. He has a very interesting, thorough way to address the piano regulation process, and it's outlined in a one sheet that's very succinct but very informative in managing that process. We had a couple of glitches with Wayne's lecture, and we'll probably be recording an updated version to accompany what we already have. So keep an eye out for that. Grand piano construction is the final lecture that we had here. That was, again, added as bonus content. And if you're just a Radio Hour subscriber or attendee, then you may have gotten a little bit of an insight into that. So that occurred just last Saturday. And Radio Hour subscribers were not only able to see the 4th hour of that lecture, because it was over 4 hours long, but we let you kind of accompany us into the 5th hour, because Michael Spreeman and Leo, as Joachim Leonardi likes to be referred to in common parlance, had a ton of really interesting stuff to say about construction of pianos. And we planned 3 to 4 hours and ended up being over 4 hours, almost 5 hours of content. That, I would say, is a super valuable lecture, just because we don't have a lot of information on how people think about piano design and construction. If you want to learn about that, you either have to kind of just figure it out yourself by taking pianos apart and putting them back together. Maybe you have to be a part of a factory, right, and be really inside on the process of that design yourself. But pretty much there's really not a lot of ways to access that. And from what I've heard, although it's probably changing in the past several years, some of these piano manufacturers don't necessarily even have a lot of design skill in-house, right? They're just kind of using design that has stood the test of time. So, okay, this is how the pianos have been made. Let's continue to make them that way. They don't always have experts on staff that are focused on piano design. In fact, they might actually ship in people like Michael Spreeman or Leo to kind of help them design pianos. So having a 4 or 5 hour lecture just focused on piano design, concepts and issues is really a treasure for us to be able to access. So they talked about that content for 4 hours. They talked about plate design. They talked about scaling. They talked about the frame of the piano. They talked about soundboard. They talked about um, uh, bridges, and they brought in a lot of thoughtful information. They compared different piano designs. They talked about what I thought was really fascinating is Leo has this sensibility where he can see a piano, right? He can look at the plate of the piano and the shape of the piano, and he could tell you how it's going to sound, which is fascinating. So, someone who spent that much time designing pianos, that they can tell things about the tone of the piano just by looking at it. And it makes sense, of course, but it's not obvious that you would be able to do that. So that's that. And then I'll give you a little bit more about what's upcoming. I do have some lectures that are going to come up from Freddie Ravel is going to give a special introduction to some of our other content that's going to be coming in the future here. He's the musician, I said, played with Madonna, Earth, Wind and Fire, Al Jarreau, many more. We have a lecture with who am I thinking of? He's a flamenco jazz piano player who takes the rhythms of his native country, Spain, and incorporates them into jazz music. He's going to teach us a bit about how to go about doing that, and how he's thought about that and how his thoughts about music have evolved. And I literally I've been able to meet with him and pre-recorded some content from him, and I've been experimenting with this stuff just at home in my own playing, and it's been really cool. Being inspired by what he brought to the table. His name is Chano Dominguez. He's a friend of mine from New York City, who's a Grammy Award-winning piano player who's played all over the world, Carnegie Hall to probably Blue Note Jazz Club in New York City. And then on top of that, we have Frederick Chu, who's been lecturing with us previously, and he talks about pedal techniques. He has very advanced ways of talking about pedal techniques. He's probably one of the only pianists in the world, just among a handful, who really thinks in a very thoughtful way about how he uses pedals. He talks about the sustain pedal and some of the nuances that many people don't think about. He talks about the sostenuto pedal and some of the nuances that many people don't think about. And he talks about the shift pedal. And again, the theme of what he talks about is nuances that people don't typically think about, and how he incorporates them in his playing and his interpretation of various pieces, historical music pieces, how he puts a spin on them by doing special things with the pedal. Example, he might play Debussy's Clair de Lune. He gives an example of how he plays that, but he used his specialized pedal techniques that probably no one else would ever think to use to create a really cool interpretation of that kind of music. So I hope that was useful, folks. Just a little bit of an overview, not only of the history of Piano Technicians Masterclasses, but of the convention as it stands today, and some of the things that are to come for the people who have signed up for that content. And next week we'll see you again, and looking to bring some more guests on in the future. So look out for some cool content. I'm talking to, I guess, I'll say this out loud because I think we're probably going to get there. I'm talking to like Fazioli pianos to maybe come in and bring us some content. We did have a special interview. Oh, it's not even listed on the website. I have to put that up there. We had a special interview with someone from what is it? Steinway. I can't think of it. we had another special interview as part of the convention with a piano manufacturer in Germany that, for whatever reason I can't think of the name of right now, but a very Grotrian. There you go. So we had the CEO of Grotrian. We have a special interview that's included in that content for the convention. I did an interview with him, and he would like to participate further in the future. Maybe we can bring on some content where technicians from his factory floor come in and show us some interesting stuff. So yeah, so we're looking forward to see you again next week. Thank you guys all for joining today. It's been a pleasure as always. Feel free to reach out to me if you have comments, questions, or anything else you'd like to chat about. This is all for you. So, I'm always open to your feedback and things. All right. Yeah, Elday, thanks for being here. John Ross, thank you for attending. Kevin Clem, always great to see you here as well. We'll sign off for now and see you next week.